Welcome to the Shining Light Podcast. This is Pastor Sam.
And Patrick, no compromise with evil Wyett.
And today we're going to be talking about exercising.
Iran.
Oh, Iran. Oh, the country, not the exercise. I see.
We had a crack about that right before we came on. But we're going to follow up with the live update that we gave earlier been less than a week ago.
That's right.
So we did that Monday night, and of course, Tuesday is when things actually started kicking off. So there's an idea that everything's kind of calmed down, everything's back to usual, no big deal, and that's probably not the case. So,
right. And in fact, we should probably maybe go back through the events as to what happened. Maybe we should just toot our own horn.
Okay.
A little bit and just, hey, this is what we, But looking at it here, like you said, we did that podcast Monday night, the emergency broadcast podcast.
I like the way that rhymes.
Yeah, that was not planned.
That rolled off your lips really good.
But we looked at that, and some of the things that we really went over were the idea that Iran, of course, they're out for blood, and they were just getting ready to bury Soleimani.
Which they did on Tuesday.
And then something was probably going to come down the bend right after that because they were kind of waiting for that grieving period, that mourning period to get over, and then they were going to attack. And what kind of happened there?
Well, we knew that they had rockets that were fueled and put out their launching pads on the coast, and they were in position. There had been several warnings of what they were going to do, warnings to the different countries that house American troops to keep your people away from these potential targets, so you won't get killed. The thought was 1,000 meters, which is over half a mile. So they had all these different warnings out, and indications from intelligence sources were that the Iranians were going to move. And of course, after Soleimani was buried, that evening, there were a series of rockets fired on a couple of bases in Iraq, U.S. base that housed U.S. troops. So, Al-Assad Air Force Base was one, and there was, I think Camp Taji maybe got a few missiles as well. So, they did, in fact, fire missiles. So, that was the interesting thing. The standard operating procedure in such an event would be to, one, neutralize the source of where these missiles are coming from. So, that would require an attack on the missile launching sites, which were in Iran. And any other follow-up that would be deemed necessary if you want to kick the whole thing off, start taking out command and control. There's a whole bunch of different targets you could target. That didn't happen. Nothing like that happened. So that was kind of interesting that evening as I was waiting for damage assessments to come in and hear what the counter response was. We supposedly had planes in the air, but there was no reports of any action as far as U.S. forces firing back. So that was kind of puzzling to me at that point. The second thing that was puzzling to me was that there appeared to be no interception of the missiles that were sent by Iran towards our targets. That was really puzzling because we have that capability through Patriot missiles, Hawks. There's different systems we have to shoot down incoming missiles, to track and shoot down incoming hostile aircraft. So there were no reports of that either. So the next day, and that evening, that was interesting, Mike Rogers, who's a congressman from Louisiana, Republican, was saying, well, the Iranians never did really hit anything of significance. There were no casualties, nobody killed, nobody wounded. So at this point, we're not going to respond militarily. And I'm scratching my head going, now that is odd. And you're wondering because there's conflicting reports coming in from different places. Some are claiming there are casualties, and you have Mike Rogers come out and say there isn't. The president announces first, they're announcing that he's going to speak that evening, and then they announce he's going to wait till the next morning to speak, which would have been Wednesday morning. And I kind of found that odd as well. So Wednesday morning they did speak, and I saw some pictures. Some aircraft hangars were hit on these bases, but it appeared that nothing was targeted towards actually where people were. And I found that very interesting too. So all these things were puzzling me. This was not your typical attack, counterattack going on. So I don't know if you were watching all this stuff, Pastor Sam, but that was, I knew there was something else going on behind the scenes that we weren't aware of.
I wasn't necessarily watching this super close, but one thing I did do is I called up the expert, Patrick, no compromise with evil Wyett, and I said, hey, what's going on with Iran?
Woke him up from his nap, no doubt.
Yeah,
so.
And so, but it is really interesting to go and to look at this, that we were attacked and we chose not to respond, essentially, and kind of act like this wasn't a big deal because though I understand nobody died, I mean, they're sending missiles at you. That means it's a big deal, at least in my mind.
Well, how do you know at the outset of those missiles being launched that nobody's going to be killed? You immediately obviously treat a missile shot from a foreign nation at your forces is a very real threat and even an act of war. It's an act of war. It's not just saber rattling. When you have missiles fired at your troops, that is an act of war. You're actively and aggressively attacking the enemy, is what the Iranians were doing. So you're going, well, this is all weird. So President Trump comes on and he starts speaking. If you saw that speech, it's about a little less than 10 minutes, 9 minutes and something, speech that he gave that morning. You immediately can tell that he's not very comfortable. He seems to be a little disjointed, actually starts out. The good news he's supposedly giving you doesn't seem to be good news on his face. He has trouble kind of reading the teleprompter, getting the words out. I look at the generals behind him. One of them kind of keeps a pretty cool demeanor. The other one guy looks like he's kind of back and forth looking around. He looks like he's uptight about something or upset about something. So you're trying to process all this information saying, what does this mean? Then we find out a few hours after these missiles were launched that an airliner that was taking off for the Ukraine had crashed. And the Iranians were claiming that it was just a technical difficulty, coincidental that it crashed at that time, that there's no way that they shot it down. They had nothing to do with it. It was all technical difficulties, and this charade went on for several days. But intelligence sources were saying, wait a minute, we were tracking this plane just as you were. It took off about 2 minutes into the flight. 2 missiles were launched, and it was struck and exploded and went down. They said, oh, no, we have eyewitnesses to say the plane was actually trying to turn around. And then video comes out where somebody actually shows missiles hitting this plane. So finally the Iranians have to admit, with overwhelming evidence against them, that, well, yeah, we actually shot this plane down. And everybody's going, well, it was an accident. Now, that also strikes me as odd. The coasts of Iran on the Persian Gulf, which would be, if you're looking at a map, to the west, would be firing across the Gulf towards targets in Iraq. Tehran, where this airplane took off, is in northern part of the country, central part of Iran, not near where the missiles were coming from. And this plane was also taking off to the east. Now, they have traffic control just like we do. They know what commercial planes are taking off and where they are. There's no way to mistake this plane as an enemy plane. It just took off from your airfield. So that was kind of disconcerting. And what's really disconcerting there, too, is all the world leaders are jumping real quick saying, oh, yeah, it was probably just a mistake. I don't know. Maybe it was. But maybe there was somebody aboard that plane or several somebodies or information that was getting out of the country that they found out or didn't want to leave, and it was taken care of that way. Don't think that these people aren't brutal enough to get rid of 1 or 2 or 3 or however many people. Certainly that's not a problem.
Right. Well, and that's kind of an interesting situation, the plane going down. And because one thing that I saw about that was, is it Canada's, is it Prime Minister, President Trudeau?
Prime Minister.
Prime Minister Trudeau.
Justin Trudeau.
Yeah, he was even upset about this. So, I mean, you think about somebody who's is spineless and completely worldly as Trudeau, he gets upset about this kind of a thing. I mean, he's buddies with Iran. Let's be honest here. Worldview-wise, anyways, he's buddies with Iran from worldviews, and he's upset about this because there were 60-some Canadians that were killed on this plane.
And some of them were dual citizenship. There were students, Iranian students, Canadian, dual citizenship people. Yeah, and along with some Britons, Afghanis, obviously some Ukrainians. No Americans. Americans are not flying out of Tehran, so that was a good thing.
Right. But looking at that, it was kind of an interesting thing to go and to see that even Trudeau got upset as to why, when you trace it back to those, the other events that took place, that we had missiles fired upon us that we haven't attacked. And we're going to explore that here in just a moment. But first, we want to remind you to, if you like what you're hearing here on the Shining Light Podcast, go ahead and follow us at theshininglightministries.com. Once again, that's theshininglightministries.com. And you can find us also on iTunes and Google Play and pretty much anywhere that there is podcasts. We're on quite a few platforms there. So go ahead and follow us, subscribe to us if you haven't yet, and follow us there. But yeah, find out our articles and stuff at theshininglightministries.com. But Patrick, why do you think, even though Trudeau was getting upset about this, why would you think that, Trump wouldn't respond by attacking them?
See, and that's the question. If you're on one of these bases and it's proven that these missiles can be fired in your direction, and there's apparently no U.S. response to either neutralize the source or a missile defense to aggressively and actively try to defend you, that would make me a bit uncomfortable being in that situation. So there's a couple possibilities. Some were saying, and this story circulated, that maybe Trump and the Iranians had struck a deal because General Soleimani, had got to be so powerful in Iran. The Iranian leadership, the Ayatollah, was afraid of him, wanted him eliminated, so sent him to Baghdad, told the Americans he's going to be there, and we agreed to take him out. And then we could kind of do a little bit of like we're going to get revenge and shoot some missiles at some hangars and call it a day. Okay, that doesn't make much sense to me. There's a lot of easier ways to get rid of General Soleimani within their regime, claim the Israelis did it, blow up his car, have somebody shoot him, claim it was an Israeli secret agent or double agent or whatever, and take care of it that way. Sending him to Iraq and that sort of situation, it just seems the long way around the bend. They take care of things more directly.
Well, and it doesn't quite make sense with what's the political climate of what's going on in Iran either, because correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't there several protests going on right now in Iran, kind of uprisings, riots, kind of things going on?
And there have been. In fact, Soleimani was in charge of suppressing those different insurrections over the last year, in which about, they're guessing at this current round was about 1,500 people were killed. And they've been known to also imprison, torture, rape dissenters in the past. And Soleimani was a big part of that as well. So. But they're also in the streets right now because, I mean, several of them actually like the fact that this butcher of not just Americans but everybody was dead. But that plane that was shot down, there's a lot of people now in the streets demanding that Khomeini, the Ayatollah, step down. They're tired of him and this regime, and we'll see how that goes because there's a lot of people out in the streets now. Innocent people on an airplane shot down. The Iranians had to admit doing it. That's the people of Iran don't like this by and large.
Right, and with Soleimani dead, this kind of actually empowers the people of Iran a little bit, is what it seems like, at least from what I've seen from afar. It seems like they've been empowered to stand up against the Ayatollah, which is like Iran's president, correct?
More so than that, he's their dictator.
Yeah,
he's not elected. He's not elected, so he's like the supreme ruler of Iran. He's the top of the heap as far as Iran goes, and he rules by decree. But the face of their oppressor, Soleimani, is gone. He's dead. So that would make the people happy, and like you said, maybe embolden them too. And then the fact they shoot down this airplane. So there's a lot of dissent going on in Iran. The sanctions the U.S. has been putting against Iran for a while now has been having an effect on the economy. The people are disgruntled anytime you start messing with stuff like that. And that's why the Iranians are a little bit more trigger happy, shall you say. A desperate nation does desperate things, people to stay in power. One other thing before we actually go back to the issue of the missiles going across, there was an earthquake or a seismic event registered near the Bushehr nuclear facility, a 4.9, so right along the same time. Now, a seismic event very well could be an earthquake. We have a lot of different earthquakes going on right now around the world. Puerto Rico's been hit with a third major earthquake here recently. The Philippines have had major earthquakes the past couple of weeks. So it's not unusual at this time now in history that we have earthquakes. God can certainly put an earthquake wherever he wants one. Another possibility, though, would be some sort of an explosion or detonation of sufficient magnitude to cause a seismic event. Now, these can happen either through major bombs, big bombs, nuclear weapons, which we're not saying a nuclear weapon happened, but you could also have some sort of a a virus which is introduced into a system, such as the Stuxnet virus that was introduced to the Iranian military complexes, nuclear programs a few years back. It's believed by maybe the Israelis, and it caused all kinds of problems. They had some underground missiles explode as part of that virus being able to get in there and mess some stuff up. And that caused a setback to their nuclear program for quite a while till they could get that cleaned up. There could have been a special forces attack on a facility somewhere. We don't know exactly what the cause of that seismic event was. It could have been perpetrated by our side or the Israelis, say, as an example, or it could have been a natural event. But that's also coincidental that it would happen at this time.
Well, and in thinking about that, you got wars, rumors of wars, and now earthquakes.
Caused by something.
Caused by something. Does that kind of sound like some end time stuff to you?
Sounds kind of biblical to me.
It does. Now, we're not going to set a date on the rapture. At least I'm not. I mean, maybe you want to, Patrick?
Well, I've got a special voice. No, I'm not going to.
No. We're not going to set any dates, but we're looking at that kind of stuff and realizing, the Bible is true. Of course, we realize that, and it's starting to happen in front of our eyes, at least to some point. I can promise you that each day that passes by, we're one day closer. So
exactly.
But back to that idea of why they wouldn't have attacked. One was, you said, one idea was that we were in league with Iran, and that doesn't seem to be likely. Perhaps
No.
it's possible, but
40
it doesn't
years of
seem
war.
to be. Yeah, it doesn't seem to be likely.
Conflict, I should say.
Yeah, and I mean, Trump's talked a pretty big fight before they launched missiles at us.
Yeah, I mean, Trump, vastly different than the last administration that gave $150 billion to the Iranians, and I'm sure all that money went to build orphanages, take care of widows, and distribute food to the hungry, or not. It went into weapons for terrorists, training for terrorists, weapons programs. That's where that money went. That's exactly where it was known it would go to. Iran has long been the statewide sponsor, number one sponsor of terrorism around the world. So giving money to a regime like that, you know what the outcome's going to be. In fact, some of those missiles shot at our guys probably was purchased with that money. So just goes to show you. So yeah, well, that's probably not what happened with this administration. Some would say that Trump just simply didn't have the nerve to actually carry through with the threats, because he made some rather direct threats. And he said, if you attack us, then we will attack. We've already picked out 52 of your sites that we will attack in return. Our response may be disproportionate, which would mean don't mess with us. And then all this happens. There's a round of missiles fired, another round of missiles fired, and there appears to be no response. And we say, we're not going to escalate this. We're not going to respond. So you look at that at the face and you say that doesn't make much sense given the past histories, what the president's claimed. But then let's go back a little bit farther to kind of look at a similar situation that happened last year. So Saudi Arabia, which is the arch nemesis in the Muslim world of Iran being the seat of Shia power, and Saudi Arabia being the seat of Sunni power, the two different sects of Islam. The Iranians had in the past, and they continue to do so, they will attack their enemies such as Israel and Saudi Arabia through their proxies. So different forces that they support, give money to, and provide weapons to, they also direct and say, hey, shoot missiles. So they've done this several times, so we're aware of this. It's actually the Iranians pushing the buttons behind the scenes, but it's their proxy forces actually doing the dirty work. Well, last year, the Iranians fired from their territory, from their country, missiles into Saudi Arabia, hitting the large oil field there, Aramco, and disabling, cutting production by about half on the facilities they hit. And they were pretty accurate on what they hit. And you're thinking, well, okay, there's a direct act of war, Iran against Saudi Arabia, but you're thinking, so wait a minute, we watch everything that's being launched in Iranian soil, whether it's an airplane, a missile, or a bottle rocket, we know when it goes off. We got them under surveillance, satellite, planes, all kinds of surveillance technology. We know what's going on. So the missiles were launched, and we knew they were headed towards Saudi Arabia. And they went into Saudi Arabia, and they hit those oil fields. At the time, I was thinking, now how in the world did those missiles get into Saudi Arabia and hit the oil fields without us responding, at least in shooting them down? And then just this past week, we have the same thing. We know when they're launching, we were expecting to launch, and they did. And the missiles fly into Iraq towards our bases, knowing that our bases would be the targets, and they hit those bases. And again, we didn't intercept or shoot them down. And to my understanding, nothing was shot. There was no attempt to intercept those missiles. And you have to wonder why.
That is a good question. Why? I mean, why wouldn't we shoot them down? I mean, if I'm sitting at home expecting Iran to attack us, surely our U.S. military is assuming it, right? I would hope so.
And they were on high alert. I mean, they knew.
Right.
I mean, the stuff we're giving you is not like it's top secret. They have professional people understand all this stuff far better than we do. They go to all the meetings. They know what military capabilities are. At least they thought they did. And so they know that Iran's going to respond, right? They know it.
Right. And that brings up just what you're saying there. It brings up the question, why didn't we intercept those missiles? Why didn't we, knock them out of the air? It'd be one thing, because we talked about this in our first Iran update, that if they had, sent out hundreds of thousands of missiles, I think, or 200,000 missiles or whatever, we wouldn't be able to shoot them all down, right?
Yeah. So if you divvy up the missiles, they have about 500 per base. That would be a lot of missiles incoming for you to try to knock down. Some are going to get through, and then we have a failure rate sometimes anyway, even with our most advanced systems. So sometimes they're going to get through anyway. But you can just overwhelm a missile defense if they have X amount of missiles, say 100. We use that as an example. 100 missiles to repel aircraft or incoming missiles, and you fire 500 missiles. Obviously, the math is 400 of those missiles are going to be unopposed.
Excuse me. Yeah, that's correct. And so is that what happened?
So the question is, And we're a superpower, right? Nobody can mess the United States. We're above everybody, so we're superior in all ways. Okay, that's been the prevailing theory. So was it a matter of we chose not to intercept those missiles, which seems unlikely because military doctrine says we protect our own?
Yeah.
Or even the more disturbing, and go back to how Trump seemed to be, like he just found out something that night that he didn't know, and his generals weren't happy about it either. Perhaps we don't have the technology now to meet the missile threat coming from Iran. You go, well, but Iran's just Iran. I mean, they're a third world country. Indications are that Chinese technology and probably Russian technology has been given to the Iranians. We know that they buy weapons from these people. They get assistance from these people. They themselves are kind of proxies in the larger geopolitical conflict of these nations. So take this as a possibility. And this is what I've been reading and hearing about. That Chinese technology right now currently has the ability on their missiles, and this is what the Iranians were launching at us, using this technology, to either blind our defenses, like electronically kind of disable them as the missiles are incoming, or to somehow camouflage the missiles themselves where our systems cannot lock onto them. Now, you don't just shoot missiles up in the air in hopes of hitting incoming missiles. There's a system of identifying the incoming missiles, locking onto those missiles, and then firing interceptors to take out those missiles. Now, that system works as long as you have the capability of seeing those missiles incoming. If you don't have the ability to do that, then to the missile systems, the anti-missile systems, there's nothing in the sky to shoot at, even though in real time, in the real world, missiles are coming through, over, and passing in. This is apparently what happened in Saudi Arabia as well, since there were no interceptions of missiles incoming. And then this was replicated or duplicated again this past week, with American forces being the targets. Now, the interesting thing is those missiles targeted areas that were not housing U.S. troops. So it appears to be, as the general said, that the Iranians were trying to avoid actual casualties, which would escalate if you kill or wound Americans with those sort of attacks. So it gives us the chance to say, okay, we're not going to respond because nobody was actually killed in that attack. That's information we're getting. But it's a frightening proposition that we don't have the ability, if this is the case. Currently our technology is not to a level where we can detect incoming missiles from the enemy. Now, you say, well, how can this be? I mean, we're the United States. We're the greatest superpower ever. And I hate to try to drag politics into this, but it's very relevant. The Obama administration, during their 8 years, did lots of things to cut the military's research and development, to purge the military of effective leadership, to drive good people out that they didn't actually get out and remove. And they were, if you give $150 billion to your sworn enemies, the Iranians, and try to make it where they have a nuclear program that's going to be able to do what they were doing, which is developing nuclear weapons. And let's be honest, the Iranians have access to the Soviets, or not the Soviets, the Russians, and the Chinese, and the North Koreans. There's been some talk that they don't have to develop their own nuclear weapons. They can just simply purchase this technology or buy the intact weapons from one of these states, obviously covertly. And that's probably taken place. So this idea that we can keep them from nuclear weapons is kind of silly in today's world, that there's people willing to provide them with these weapon systems. Russians have provided them with S-400 anti-aircraft, anti-missile system, which is considered the best in the world. If we were to try to go in and take out their missiles this past week, we would be running into the best Russian technology, and we would be taking some big casualties with our airplanes. And the fact that they can now fire on our guys, if this is true, without those missiles being detected, you're really running into a hornet's nest on our side. So we're now left scrambling, if this is the case, of trying to figure out how do we now overcome what they apparently seem to have. And I'm saying this because of, again, the Saudi situation last year and this situation last week. It is not military doctrine to allow your forces to be fired on without some sort of response, or at the very least, trying to intercept those missiles. Now, the other thing that we're hearing a little bit about is that the Iranian leadership, and maybe the Russians and Chinese, said, we're not looking to really get the Americans riled up at this point. We just want to show them that they need to stand down. We have the technology now that's superior to theirs. It's my understanding that the Iranian military, which is kind of the more fanatical, and that you killed Soleimani, our guy, we want actual American blood. The Quran demands it. We are Muslims. We need blood for blood. and that there's a struggle even internally going on right now that we still want to engage American forces and kill them. So the fact that things seem to be calm now and de-escalated, realize at any time, now I'm not saying it's going to happen anytime soon, but it could. Any time that there could be a launch and an attack on American forces of significance. Okay, it's the old saying is revenge is a dish best served cold. Right now, Americans got their mind towards NFL playoffs and Super Bowl and different things going on in our lives. They're not even thinking about this. The psychological effect now would be greater than it would have been Tuesday when we were expecting this sort of thing.
Right, and one thing to remember about Iran, too, is that with them getting revenge on Israel a few different times, they've actually waited several months in some instances and also a couple of years in other instances before they actually got their revenge. And it's because oftentimes they're put at a disadvantage. It is interesting that really our options right now, it looks like that we are either colluding with the enemy or that we are inferior in technology. Neither one is a good proposition.
No, but it was if the second case is correct, where their missiles, they now have a technology that can defeat our anti-aircraft or anti-missile systems. The proper response from Trump was doing what he did. He didn't like to have to do it, but the proper response is, let's not escalate this thing right now and we kind of have a losing hand. We need to scramble and figure out what we're going to do and revamp our technology. Now, my understanding is we could have went after Iran, but it would have required possibly a full-scale nuclear strike to take that out. And I don't know if the world right now wants to have a nuclear war.
Right, and also with that, though, there was some good news on the technology side of things, and that is the news that came out of Israel, that they have laser systems now. Is that correct?
They do have ground-mounted laser systems that, and again, if you can detect the missiles incoming, as fast as some of the missile technology is now from say, Russia, that has hypersonic missiles, 27 times the speed of sound. That's fast, but it's not faster than the speed of light. A laser, not only that can take down incoming aircraft and missiles, it's much cheaper to take down incoming aircraft and missiles than it is a multi-$1,000 single interceptor. Plus, you run out of interceptors after a while. With a laser system, as long as you have electricity, you for maybe $1 or $2 can be shooting down, $100,000, $200,000 missiles. That's a pretty good cost savings measure, and that's a good thing. So Israel carts this right after these missile attacks. Israel says we have this capability. Now the United States is also working on this. It's thought that maybe we have prototypes right now, actual production maybe 2022, when we can actually start installing these aboard naval ships and that sort of thing. But that's looking at everything from a military or a human standpoint. But there's one other standpoint that I think is even more
That's right.
higher than this that we should be looking at. And we'll use an example of David and Goliath in the Bible. Pastor Sam, if you looked on paper, you saw a picture of Goliath, this giant who from his youth was a man of war, and you saw him in his glory, in his regal apparel, his armor, his shields, his sword that most of us couldn't even pick up, and this man could wield with one hand because he was so big and powerful. And you say, so we have Goliath on this side, and we have this shepherd boy from Israel. Tough little guy, but he's just a shepherd boy. He's not a military man. All the professional military men in Israel were scared to death of this Goliath character. But we're going to put those two in battle, and we're going to have them fight. Pastor Sam, which one of those would you say is going to win that battle? I mean, just looking at him, not knowing the background. But.
Right. I mean, Goliath's 9 foot 10 inches tall.
Okay, that's pretty good.
Right. I think he'd been a great basketball player. I always thought that.
Wouldn't have to jump the dunk.
That's right. But no, I mean, you look at this, and on paper, Goliath wins not just 9 out of 10 times; he wins 10 out of 10 times.
Yeah, there's no chance. This guy has David. This little guy has no chance against this monstrous giant professional fighter. And yet God delivered the battle to David, who showed faith and courage because of his faith, and said, asked the armies of Israel, why are you allowing this Philistine, this pagan, to insult the God of creation, our God, the God of Israel and our country? And he was indignant over that. Why do you not go forward with the faith and God is real? Why are we taking this from this pagan over here? And then he went down with God on his side, and God delivered the victory to David. Now, that's not just a singular incident. God always delivers the victory in battle. The unfortunate thing for this nation is we've been very militarily successful over the years. And that was because we were a nation that beseeched God and sought God and realized that any strength or power we have came from God, from his blessings. We were a reverent and obedient people. Pastor Sam, are we a reverent and obedient people now?
We're not. What I preached on Wednesday night at our midweek prayer meeting is righteousness exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. And I really wanted to stress that idea of any people because I said, I don't know what's going to happen with this Iran deal. I don't know if we're going to go into war. I don't know if we're going to wipe them off the map. I don't know. But one thing I do know is that there is a possibility that God humbles us because we have a systemic sin. You want to talk about systemic racism, you want to talk about systemic oppression. The left wants to talk about those kind of things. Let me tell you what we do have that is systemic, and that's our sin. We have a system of sin that is in our nation, and the only way to fix that is through repentance. Mm-hmm. We have a system of murdering children. We have a system of not just murdering children, but also now a system of sexual perversity. I mean, we're just perverse sexually.
And promiscuity. Anything goes.
Right. And what we need repentance. And I said sin is a reproach to any people. It's not just to those people or these people or them. It's in our life also. That's why I said sin is a reproach to any people. If sin is what took down Israel, God's chosen people, why would we think that sin would not take down the United States eventually? I don't know. Maybe it will be through Iran. Maybe it will be through something else. I don't know. But one thing I do know is that sin is a reproach to any people, and unless we repent, it will eventually take us down as a nation.
So you have this situation where you're saying on paper Iran wouldn't have a chance against the United States. Ethiopia could overcome the United States. Montenegro could overcome the United States if God has decreed it. As Pastor Sam mentioned, in the Bible there are several instances where God used pagan nations to punish Israel for their lack of obedience, for their open rebellion against him. I think we can safely assume that this nation has showed a lack of obedience to our founding principles, which were based on the Bible and Christian ideas and ethics, and what we are today, in open defiance of God, rebellious to God, and even saying there isn't a God. I mean, our society, we were once Christian and we're based on Christian values. I think it's safe to assume today that while there is a Christian remnant in this nation, for the most part, this nation is very secular, very worldly, and is in defiance of the Almighty. So there comes, and we believe that our power that we've shown around the world now, we're the superpower, comes by our own effort. It's our arrogance that assumes that we do these things of our own might and accord. And we take away the glory of God, and we take away his sovereignty, and we say we don't need God. And God has a way, even in his love, grace, and mercy, which he's shown in bountiful amounts towards this nation, because we've deserved punishment before now. Mm-hmm. But there comes a time when that even itself expires, because God's righteousness and holiness demands that there would be judgment forthcoming.
That's right. So the takeaway when it comes to this whole Iran situation is that physically, we want you to know, be aware. It's not that this is necessarily over. It seems quiet right now, but it could be simply the calm before the storm.
It's a lull. And as you also mentioned, we don't know when the next hit comes, when the next action comes. But it may come rather quickly. Now, we keep building up forces in that area, which is another interesting thing. We're getting more and more people over there. This is also kind of an impetus on the Iranians, like we need to act before they get stronger. But and we don't know what assurances they have from, say, their allies, the Russians and Chinese. How involved would they be? Would this kick off whatever? We're saying be vigilant, especially in these times. These are biblical times. The Bible would refer to these as we believe we're in the end times. Now, generations before us have believed the same things, but they didn't have the reestablishment of Israel in 1948.
Right, that's huge.
Actually starting that biblical prophetic clock. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we have that in our time, and we look and we see the different things. Jesus said you're not going to know the day or the hour. So anybody that tries to tell you that 5 days from now at this time or whatever, they start setting dates, flee from those people. Jesus said no man knows the day or the time, no one but my Father. So anybody that says definitively that this is going to happen then, they're a false prophet. Don't listen to them. But he did say we are to know the season. We know that the sky, we can tell that when summer's coming, we are to know at least the time, the general time frame area. He's given us plenty of descriptions of what's going to happen and what the settings of that, which apostasy was one of the major markers of our time.
Do we have some apostasy today?
We have a little bit of apostasy. We actually have a whole lot of apostasy, a lot of false teachings, even in the church, and that's where apostasy come from, in the church. So these things are happening right now. So we are in that prophetic window.
That's right. And so physically, beware. Spiritually, beware.
But don't be overcome with fear or trepidation.
Right.
Nothing happens that God doesn't know about in advance. There is absolutely no surprises with God. We remain faithful to Him. And look, these things you and I can't do anything about. But what we can do things about are those lost loved ones, family and friends, and even strangers that we don't know, that we can be witnessing to and telling them about the good news of Jesus Christ and what He's done for them, because everyone needs a Savior. So we need to stay busy about our Father's work, as Jesus said. And when our time's done, it's done, we go home. This other stuff's going to happen. It's a good idea to keep an eye on, or a good thing to keep an eye on what's going on. We talked a little bit about maybe extra food and water, that sort of thing in your house in case there's some sort of a disruption. My understanding is cyber stuff is going on right now. So the war that we're talking about now is not being fought with missiles at this current moment. It's cyber attacks going back and forth, looking for weaknesses and that sort of thing. So those guys are staying pretty busy.
That's right. So beware and be ready, but don't be fearful. Only be fearful of God. For the Shining Light Podcast, this is Pastor Sam.
And Patrick, no compromise with evil Wyett.
Have a great day.